What if Rintarou Okabe entered Warhammer 40k? He arrived in a universe where even time fears to move forward. Picture this: a man awakens on scorched Ferrocrete, surrounded by the skeletal remains of hive spires that claw uselessly at a blackened sky. His vision swims with static. His ears ring with screams that shouldn't exist, screams that echo from moments not yet born and deaths already forgotten. The air tastes of rust and burnt ozone. His fingers clutch something familiar, a phone, an ancient relic from an age when humanity still dreamed of tomorrow. The screen flickers erratically, displaying impossible timestamps. 00 40,000 AD, error 00 40,000 AD. Reality itself stutters around him like corrupted data. This is not the world he knew. This is not the world anyone should know. The man tries to stand, but his legs betray him. Gravity feels wrong here, as if the planet itself rejects the laws of physics he once understood. Around him, the ruins breathe with malevolent life. Shadows move against the light. Whispers curl through the smoke-choked darkness, speaking in languages that predate language itself. He recognizes nothing, yet something deep in his bones tells him he has been here before. Impossible. He would remember this hell, wouldn't he? His mind races through calculations, theories, hypotheses, anything to anchor himself to reason in a place where reason has been dead for 10,000 years. What happens when the man who mastered time finds himself in a place where time itself bleeds? This is the question that will haunt every moment of what follows. Rintarou Okabe, self-proclaimed mad scientist, builder of time machines, savior of timelines, has entered a realm where his greatest achievements mean nothing, where science is heresy, where genius is burned, where hope is the cruelest joke the universe can tell. He doesn't know it yet, but his arrival has already been noticed, by things that exist between seconds, by entities that feed on causality itself, by a galaxy that has been waiting for someone foolish enough to try bending time in the one place where time has already shattered. His name was once Rintarou Okabe, brilliant student, desperate friend, the man who leaped across world lines to save a single girl. In another life, in another universe, he was Hoawin Kioma, the mad scientist who defied destiny itself. He built a machine from spare parts and a microwave. He sent memories through time. He rewrote reality with text messages and sheer stubborn will. He won against fate, against CERN, against a future written in stone. He saved Mayuri Shina from certain death. He preserved Kurisu Makisi's existence across timelines. He found Steins Gate, the perfect world line where everyone lives, where everyone survives, where hope actually means something, or so he thought. But now he stands, or rather collapses, in the 41st millennium, and none of it matters. The phone in his hand, his lifeline across timelines, is useless here. Dead. Silent. The familiar weight of it offers no comfort, only the crushing realization that everything he built, everything he fought for, exists in a universe so far removed from this one that it might as well be fiction. The air here doesn't just smell wrong, it feels wrong, pressing against his skin like oil, like something alive and hungry. Every breath burns, every heartbeat echoes too loudly in his chest. He can hear his blood rushing through his veins, and underneath that rhythm, something else. Something that sounds almost like laughter. If you want to witness what happens when genius meets the Grimdark, when hope confronts eternal night, when the man who conquered time faces a universe where time itself is just another wound, then stay with me. Subscribe to see how deep this rabbit hole goes, because what comes next will challenge everything you think you know about both Steins Gate and Warhammer 40k. Hit that like button if you're ready to watch a hero break. Leave a comment on whether you think anyone, even Okabe, can survive what's coming. Because I promise you, this story doesn't end the way you think. The static grows louder, the shadows closer, and somewhere in the darkness of this dying world, something whispers a name that Okabe hasn't heard in what feels like lifetimes. Hoawin Kioma, the darkness breathes. The warp has been expecting you. His mind, that brilliant instrument that once unraveled the secrets of time itself, begins to understand the horrible truth. He isn't here by accident. This isn't random dimensional displacement or a malfunction of the phone microwave. This is intentional. Something reached across the void between universes and pulled him here. Something that knew exactly what he was. Something that needed precisely what he could do. And in that moment of terrible clarity, as ash falls like snow and distant screams paint the horizon red, Rintarou Okabe understands something that will define every choice he makes from this point forward. He has not entered Warhammer 40k. Warhammer 40k has claimed him. There is a difference, and that difference will cost him everything, his sanity, his identity, his very soul, before this tale is done. The warp calls him something else now, something that hasn't been spoken aloud yet, but already exists in the spaces between moments. The clockmaker, the heretic who would make even time kneel, the fool who thought causality could save him. Well, come to the 41st millennium, Okabe Rintarou. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no Steins Gate. There is only war and time and the endless, screaming loop of what comes next. The underhive swallows him whole. Okabe doesn't remember walking here, but his legs have carried him deeper into the labyrinth of rust and ruin nonetheless. The lower levels of the hive city stretch endlessly in every direction, a vertical metropolis of forgotten humanity stacked upon itself like layers of scar tissue. Pipes wider than cargo trucks snake through darkness, dripping fluids that glow with sickly bioluminescence. The walls weep condensation that tastes of metal and despair. Somewhere far above, kilometers of habitation blocks separate him from whatever passes for sky in this nightmare. Down here, in the belly of human civilization's corpse, the only light comes from flickering lumen strips that barely hold back the pressing dark. This is where the Imperium sends its forgotten, its failures, its unwanted, and now, apparently, its interdimensional visitors. He passes people, if they can still be called that. Hunched figures with vacant eyes shuffle through the gloom, their bodies bent by generations of industrial labor and malnutrition. Some bear crude augmetics, poorly installed metal limbs that spark and grind with every movement. Others display mutations they try desperately to hide beneath tattered cloth. Extra fingers, clouded eyes that reflect light like an animal's, skin that weeps constantly from radiation burns that never heal. No one speaks. No one makes eye contact. Survival here means invisibility, and Okabe learns this lesson quickly when a child with a mechanical jaw glances at him, then immediately scurries into the shadows as if his very attention might bring death. Perhaps it will. In this place, everything feels like it carries consequences that ripple for or beyond the moment. The technology surrounding him is both familiar and alien, advanced and primitive, magnificent and grotesque all at once. Massive cogitator banks hum with processing power that would shame any supercomputer from his world, yet they're covered in purity seals, prayer scrolls and sacred oils, as if faith rather than electricity powers them. Servitors, lobotomized humans fused with machinery, perform repetitive tasks with mechanical precision, their human faces frozen in expressions of mindless contentment or eternal suffering, impossible to tell which. Okabe's scientific mind reels. This is technology treated as religion, engineering worshipped as divine mystery, the scientific method replaced with ritual and superstition. Everything he believes in perverted into something simultaneously magnificent and horrifying. It's brilliant craftsmanship in service of deliberate ignorance, and it makes him want to scream. His phone miraculously still functions, barely. The battery icon flickers between full charge and empty. The screen displays fragments of messages he never sent, from people he's never met, in languages that don't exist. Subject, Hu in Kuma. One message reads in broken Gothic script, "You cannot change what has already bled." Another, the Omnissiah weeps for fallen knowledge. And then, most disturbing, El Sai Kongru means nothing here. Here, all timelines end the same. He doesn't remember writing these. He doesn't remember receiving them. Yet there they are, proof that whatever pulled him here has been watching, waiting, preparing for his arrival. The phone is no longer just a device, it's become something else, a compass, a warning, a threat. That's when he meets the Mechanicus adept. The figure emerges from the smog like a manifestation of Okabe's own technological nightmares. More machine than man, every organic component replaced or enhanced with key saluds. Icking, whirring augmetics. A dozen mechanical dendrites sprout from the adept's spine, each tipped with different tools that twitch and adjust with insectile precision. The adept's face is a bronze mask featuring a single optical lens that rotates and focuses with disturbing intensity. When it speaks, the voice is layered, human words beneath binary cant, beneath something that might be prayer or might be madness. Unknown pilgrim, the adept intones, that singular eye fixing on Okabe's phone with the hunger of a starving man eyeing fresh meat. You bear a relic of the Omnissiah. Where did you unearth such sacred technology? Okabe's mouth goes dry. How does he explain this? How does he tell this priest of machines that his sacred relic is just a modified smartphone from a world where technology serves humanity rather than enslaving it? That he built a time machine in his apartment using a microwave and ingenuity? That science doesn't require faith, just understanding? He opens his mouth to speak, but the words die in his throat. Because he sees it now, reflected in that bronze mask and those hungry optical sensors. Telling the truth here would be catastrophic. In this universe, innovation is heresy. Discovery is sin. Independent thought is corruption. Everything that makes him Okabe Rintarou, everything that defines Houin Kyoma, is anathema to the very foundations of this civilization. He is the enemy, not because of what he's done, but because of what he is, a scientist in an age where science itself is dead. I found it, Okabe lies, surprised at how easily the deception comes. In the ruins, upper levels, it still functions, though I don't understand its purpose. The adept moves closer, mechanical limbs extending to examine the phone without touching it, as if proximity alone might reveal its secrets. Miraculous, the adept whispers, and there's genuine reverence in that synthesized voice. Pre-unification technology, perhaps, or earlier. The blessed machine spirit within must be ancient and powerful to survive so long without proper maintenance rituals. A mechanical claw gestures toward the phone's screen, which now displays nothing but static. Its display speaks in the tongue of the motive force. Only the initiated can interpret such wisdom. You, pilgrim, are blessed to be its bearer. The Omnissiah's providence has chosen you as vessel for lost knowledge. The conversation continues, but Okabe's mind races elsewhere. He's beginning to understand the shape of the cage he's trapped in. This Imperium, this galaxy-spanning human civilization, has deliberately murdered its own progress. They possess incredible technology, but refuse to understand it, treating innovation as corruption and maintenance as prayer. The scientific method has been replaced by dogma. Research has been replaced by archaeology. They don't build new things, they worship old things they can barely comprehend. And the worst part, the truly soul-crushing realization that settles over Okabe like a shroud. They had to do this. Whatever threats this universe faces, whatever horrors lurk in the darkness between stars, forced humanity to lobotomize its own genius just to survive. Science isn't dead by accident here, it was murdered, deliberately, as an act of species-wide self-preservation. And something about that realization feels like watching his own execution in slow motion. As the Mechanicus adept Pratt teals on about sacred oils and prayer protocols, Okabe feels something shift inside him, not breaking, not yet, but bending, warping, the first hairline fracture in the foundation of who he is. Because standing here, in the bowels of a hive city, on a planet whose name he doesn't even know, surrounded by the corpse of human achievement, he understands something terrible. His knowledge, his brilliant, beautiful knowledge of physics and causality and temporal mechanics, is a disease here. A cancer. A corruption that this universe will try to burn out of him by any means necessary. And if he wants to survive long enough to find a way home, he'll have to hide what he is. Become something else. Pretend that genius is faith, that understanding is worship, that the scientific method is just prayer by another name. The thought makes him want to vomit. Desperation breeds innovation, even in hell. 3 weeks into his existence in the Underhive, Okabe has claimed a forgotten maintenance tunnel as his laboratory. It's barely large enough to stand in, lit by a single failing lumen strip that casts everything in sickly yellow light. The walls drip with condensation that he's learned not to drink no matter how thirsty he becomes. Rats the size of small dogs scurry through the darkness, their eyes glowing with mutations that shouldn't be possible. But it's private, it's hidden, and most importantly, it's filled with the scavenged components he's been collecting from the Underhive's endless technological graveyard. Broken cogitators, severed servitor limbs still twitching with residual electric impulses, wiring so old it predates the Imperium itself. To everyone else, this is garbage. To Okabe, it's possibility, raw material waiting to be transformed, the beginnings of something that might, just might, let him break free from this nightmare. He works in silence, his hands moving with practiced precision, even as his mind screams at the wrongness of everything he touches. The technology here is obscene in its complexity and its deliberate limitation. Every component is over-engineered to impossible tolerances, then crippled with ritual locks and prayer circuits that serve no function except to make the device dependent on faith rather than understanding. A simple power relay contains computational ability that would shame any processor from his world, yet it's been hardwired to require hymnal activation codes. It's brilliant and stupid simultaneously, like watching a genius deliberately lobotomize themselves. But Okabe has always been good at finding workarounds, at seeing patterns others miss, at making miracles from microwaves. If he could build a time machine from spare parts and sheer stubborn will once, he can do it again. He has to, because the alternative is accepting that he'll die here, forgotten, in a universe that never wanted him in the first place. The device takes shape slowly. It doesn't look like the phone microwave. Nothing here could replicate that elegant simplicity. Instead, it's a grotesque amalgamation of imperial technology stripped of its superstitious components and rewired according to principles that the Mechanicus would call heretical. At its core sits a temporal flux capacitor salvaged from what Okabe thinks might have been a failed warp drive, though he can't be certain. Around it, crystalline circuit boards form patterns that remind him of CERN's LHC diagrams, if CERN had been run by insane monks who built their equipment using prayer and precious metals. Wires snake everywhere, connected to his phone at 13 different contact points. It shouldn't work. By every law of physics he understands, this thing is an abomination that should explode the moment he powers it on. But okay. Abe has never let impossible stop him before. The mad scientist lives again, here in the depths of damnation. He activates it at midnight, though time means nothing in the Underhive where the sun never reaches. The device hums to life with a sound that sets his teeth on edge, not mechanical, but almost organic, like something breathing. His phone's screen lights up, displaying readouts that shift between familiar temporal mathematics and symbols he's never seen before. Coordinates, timestamps, something that looks like his old world line tracker, but corrupted, displaying numbers in the negatives and fractions that shouldn't exist. This is it, Okabe whispers to himself, his voice hoarse from disuse. Subject, Ho'oin Kyuma. Experiment number 1. Timeline designation, 40K. I'm going to shift this world line. I'm going to find the path back home. And I'm going to prove that even in the grim darkness of the far future, causality still bows to genius. His finger hovers over the activation sequence. Everything he is, everything he believes, condensed into this single moment. He presses it. Reality screams. That's the only way to describe what happens next. The air itself tears open with a sound like glass shattering combined with someone sobbing. The temperature drops so fast that ice forms on every surface, including Okabe's skin. His breath comes out in white clouds that hang motionless in air that has suddenly become heavier than lead. And then the visions start. Fragments of time, broken and bleeding, assault his consciousness from every direction. He sees himself dying in 1,000 different ways, burned by the Inquisition, dissected by the Mechanicus, consumed by something with too many teeth and no face. He sees the underhive collapsing, the hive city burning, the planet cracking apart like an egg to birth something that makes his sanity try to escape through his ears. He sees timelines, but they're wrong, corrupted, twisted into shapes that violate every law of temporal mechanics he's ever proven. And underneath it all, he hears laughter. Not human laughter. Something else. Something that finds his attempts at controlling time absolutely hilarious. The device explodes. Not violently but slowly, melting like wax under invisible flame. Components he spent weeks gathering dissolve into pools of liquid metal that pool on the floor and form patterns, symbols that hurt to look at, mathematical equations that describe impossible geometries. Okabe falls backward, his mind reeling from sensory overload. When his vision clears, the laboratory is different, not physically changed, but subtly wrong in ways he can't immediately identify. The shadows fall at incorrect angles, the dripping water moves too slowly, and there, in the corner where nothing existed before, stands a figure, human-shaped, female, wearing robes that might be white or might be every color simultaneously. Her face is familiar in a way that makes his heart stop. "Mayuri," he whispers. "Doshi." Ugh, he knows it can't be her. She's universes away, safe in Stein's Gate, living a life where he succeeded. But the figure smiles with Mayuri's smile, speaks with Mayuri's voice, and says, "Okarin, you're trying to change the timeline again, but Tuturu, you can't save anyone here." She vanishes before he can respond, leaving behind only the echo of that signature phrase and the smell of ozone. Okabe sits in the ruins of his first experiment, trembling. Not from fear, though there's plenty of that, but from realization. The device worked. For one terrible moment, it actually worked. He touched the timeline, shifted probability, opened a window into other possibilities. But something was waiting on the other side, something that knew exactly how to hurt him, what face to wear, which words would cut deepest. The warp. It has to be. The scientists of this age treat temporal mechanics as heresy for a reason, and he's just discovered why firsthand. Time doesn't flow naturally here. It's been corrupted by something vast and malevolent, something that exists outside causality and finds human suffering endlessly entertaining. Every attempt to manipulate time isn't science here, it's an invitation, a doorway, a way for things that shouldn't exist to reach through and touch reality. But he can't stop. That's the horrible truth settling over him like a second skin. Even knowing the danger, even understanding that every experiment risks something worse than death, he can't abandon the attempt, because stopping means accepting his fate, means admitting defeat, means living and dying in this hell without ever seeing home again. Okabe Rintarou has never been good at accepting reality when he could change it instead. That's his gift, his curse, the thing that makes him both hero and fool. So he gathers the remains of his melted device, catalogues what went wrong, begins planning the next iteration. Somewhere in the darkness, that inhuman laughter echoes again. The warp is watching him now, really watching, and it likes what it sees. A brilliant mind trapped in impossible circumstances, doing exactly what it does best, refusing to surrender even when surrender is the only sane choice. The game has begun, and Okabe doesn't even realize he's already losing. That night, or what passes for night in the timeless underhive, he makes his first audio log, speaking into his phone, recording for an audience that might never exist, because documentation is what scientists do. Experiment 1, failure, catastrophic temporal breach, possible warp contamination, hallucinations or projections, uncertain which. Conclusion: standard temporal mechanics do not apply in this universe. Time itself is sick here, infected by something that treats causality as a suggestion rather than law. His voice wavers, but he forces it steady. Hypothesis: the warp is some form of higher dimensional space where human consciousness and physical reality intersect. Attempts to manipulate time may be interpreted as attempts to manipulate the warp itself, triggering defensive or predatory responses. Further experimentation required, more data needed. He pauses, staring at his reflection in the PH1's dark screen. Hoowin Kilmer does not surrender. Hoowin Kilmer does not accept defeat. I will find the way home. I will crack this universe's secrets. and I will prove that genius transcends even the boundaries between realities. El Sai Congro. The phone's battery dies the moment he finishes speaking. In the darkness that follows, Okabe could swear he hears that laughter again, closer now, hungry, patient, waiting for the moment when his brilliant mind finally breaks and becomes something else entirely, something useful, something the warp can use. Okabe doesn't hear them approach. Their augmetic limbs move with disturbing silence for something so mechanical. He's too focused on his work, on the third iteration of his temporal device, which hums with barely contained energy that makes the air shimmer like heat haze. This version is different, better. He's incorporated principles he observed from the first catastrophic failure, added shielding against what he theorizes might be warp intrusion, recalibrated the temporal flux ratios to account for this universe's corrupted timeline structure. It's almost ready. Another few hours and he'll attempt the second experiment, and this time he'll be prepared for whatever reaches back. Except he's not prepared for the red robes that suddenly fill his laboratory, for the dozen mechanical limbs that pin him against the wall before he can even scream, for the cold bronze mask that leans close enough that he can see his terrified reflection in its optical lens. Heretic, the Mechanicus adept whispers, and that single word carries the weight of a death sentence. They strip his laboratory bare with methodical efficiency, every component catalogued, every wire traced, every modification documented in binaric cant that sounds like accusations. The device itself they handle with reverence and revulsion in equal measure, as if it's simultaneously sacred and profane. Unsanctioned experimentation, one adept intones. Corruption of blessed machine spirits, adds another. Deviation from approved construction templates. Introduction of xeno-mathematical principles. The charges pile up like rocks on a drowning man, each one heavier than the last. But it's the final accusation that freezes Okabe's blood. Temporal heresy. This device attempts to manipulate the flow of the Omnissiah's ordained sequence. It seeks to alter what the machine god has decreed immutable. They don't understand what they're looking at. Not really, but they understand enough to know it's dangerous. Enough to know it threatens the foundations of everything they believe. Enough to know that Okabe must be stopped before his brilliance spreads like a virus through the Mechanicus forged temples. The Inquisition arrives within hours. Okabe doesn't see them at first, just feels the temperature drop and the pressure change, as if reality itself is making room for something that shouldn't fit in normal space. Then she steps into the improvised holding cell where the Mechanicus has confined him. A woman, in powdered armor the color of old bone, her face hidden behind a mirror-polished mask that reflects his own face back at him. An inquisitor. The word carries weight in this universe that Okabe is only beginning to understand. Judge, jury, executioner, authority absolute and unquestionable, empowered to burn entire worlds if corruption demands it. And she's here for him. Rintarou Okabe, she says, and her voice is surprisingly gentle, despite the implied threat in every syllable. Blee. That is your name, yes? Not the name you were born with in this Imperium. You are something else, something from outside, and you've been trying to tear holes in reality itself. She knows. Somehow, impossibly, she knows he's not from this universe. Okabe's mind races through explanations, denials, anything that might save his life, but she raises one armored hand to silence him before he can speak. Do not insult me with lies. I am Inquisitor Valdane of the Ordo Chronos, though officially my order does not exist. We deal with temporal anomalies, causality breaches, and paradoxes that threaten the Imperium's past, present, and future. The moment your device activated, we felt it. A ripple through time itself, emanating from this forgotten corner of this forgotten world. We've been watching you ever since. She leans closer, and in the reflection of her mask, Okabe sees himself looking gaunt, desperate, half-mad. The question, Rintarou Okabe, is whether you're a victim of circumstance or an agent of something far worse. Whether your experiments stem from ignorance or malice, whether we execute you immediately or study what makes you think temporal manipulation is something any sane being should attempt. Before he can answer, reality hiccups. It's the only word for what happens. One moment the Inquisitor is interrogating him, the next moment she's interrogating him again. But her words are slightly different. Her stance shifted by centimeters, the rust patterns on the wall rearranged into new configurations. Time stutters, skips, repeats with variations. The Inquisitor notices immediately. Her hand goes to a weapon Okabe can't identify, but she's not fast enough. The walls of his cell begin to weep, not water or condensation, but something that looks like liquid numbers, equations bleeding through reality from somewhere else. The temperature spikes to unbearable heat, then drops to Arctic cold, then both simultaneously in a way that violates thermodynamics and sanity. And then the laughter starts. The same inhuman laughter from his first experiment, but louder now, more present, as if something vast is pressing against the thin membrane between reality and elsewhere, stretching it to breaking point. The demon manifests as color. That's what Okabe's mind tries to process first, before the full horror resolves into something approximately human-shaped. It's every shade of blue and purple and pink that shouldn't exist, shifting and flowing like oil on water, never quite holding one form long enough to truly perceive. Eyes open and close across its surface, hundreds of them, thousands, each one focused on Okabe with intelligence that makes him want to claw his own thoughts out of his skull just to stop them from being seen so completely. Wings that might be feathers, or might be flames, or might be made of crystallized mathematics spread behind it. And its face, when it finally settles on having a face, cycles through forms: human, bird, reptile, insect, abstract geometry, back to human again. Rintarou Okabe, it says, and its voice is every voice he's ever heard speaking in. Perfect synchronization. The clockmaker, the timeline walker, the fool who thinks he understands causality. The Inquisitor is screaming something, prayers or curses, impossible to tell which, and firing a weapon that makes reality itself flinch where the shots land. But the demon ignores her, like one might ignore an annoying insect. All its attention is focused on Okabe, pinning him with regard that feels like being dissected while still conscious. "Do you know what you are?" the demon asks, circling him despite the cell walls that should prevent such movement. "You are a probability cascade, a walking temporal anomaly, a fragment of a universe where time actually flows cleanly, transplanted into a reality where time is just another wound for us to infect. You've been trying to change things, shift timelines, find the correct world line as if such a thing exists here." It laughs, and the sound makes Okabe's ears bleed. "Precious, adorable, utterly doomed, I am Kiraseth, herald of Tzench, demon of the changer of ways, and I have been watching you since the moment you arrived, watching, learning, waiting for you to become desperate enough to listen." The offer comes wrapped in honeyed words and impossible promises. Kiraseth speaks of perfect causality, of timelines that obey mathematical law, of a universe where science works as it should, and genius isn't punished with death. "You want to go home," the demon croons. "You want to return to your Stein's Gate, to your friends, to a reality that makes sense. I can give you this. I can show you the path between universes, teach you to navigate the warp's currents, provide you with knowledge that makes your temporal device look like a child's toy." Those countless eyes blink in sequence, creating a hypnotic rhythm. "All I ask in return is your assistance with a small project. Nothing too demanding. Just help me understand how you perceive causality. Share your knowledge of timeline mechanics. Let me study that brilliant mind of yours and all its beautiful, doomed attempts to impose order on chaos. Work with me, Rintarou Okabe, and I promise you'll see your Mayuri again. Refuse, and the Inquisition will burn you slowly while chanting prayers you don't believe in." The Inquisitor is still fighting. Okabe can hear the sounds of combat, the smell of ozone and burnt flesh, the screaming of reality being torn apart by forces that shouldn't exist in the same space. But it all feels distant now, muffled, as if he's experiencing it through layers of thick glass. The only thing that feels real is the demon's offer, the terrible, seductive promise of a way out, of power enough to bend this universe to his will, of understanding that transcends the Imperium's superstitious limitations. Okabe knows he should refuse, knows this is corruption in its purest form, knows that accepting a demon's bargain is how souls are lost and nightmares are born. But he's so tired, so desperate, so utterly alone in a universe that wants him dead simply for being what he is. And the demon is offering him exactly what he needs, the knowledge to build a device that actually works, that can punch through dimensional barriers and carry him home. What's a little collaboration in exchange for salvation? Yes, Okabe whispers, and the word feels like falling, like stepping off a cliff into an abyss that has no bottom, like the last moment before everything changes forever. Yes, I'll help you. Show me, teach me, give me what I need to escape this hell, and I'll give you whatever you want in return. Kiraseth's smile, and it definitely has a smile now, too wide, too many teeth, all of them sharp, is the most terrifying thing Okabe has ever seen. Excellent choice, Clockmaker. We're going to do such fascinating work together. You'll build wonders that make gods weep. You'll crack open causality itself and see what bleeds beneath. And in the process, you'll learn the most important lesson this universe has to teach. In the warp, every timeline is just another way to suffer. Every choice leads to damnation. And genius. Genius just means you'll understand exactly what's happening as you fall. The demon reaches out with something that might be a hand, and when it touches Okabe's forehead, knowledge floods his mind like poison, like revelation, like damnation wearing the face of salvation, and Okabe, fool that he is, drinks deep. He awakens to the scream, the same scream, the exact scream that greeted him on his first day in the 41st millennium, metal scraping against metal, air torn by sonic weapons, the death rattle of a world that's been dying for 10,000 years. Okabe's eyes snap open, and he's staring at scorched ferrocrete, at skeletal hive spires clawing at a blackened sky, at his own hand clutching a phone displaying impossible timestamps. 00 Ulkuts, 40,000 AD. Error. 0 Ulku, 40,000 AD. His mind reels. This is wrong. He should be in the underhive, should be touched by the demon, should be drowning in forbidden knowledge that Kiraseth poured into his skull like molten lead. But instead, he's here, at the beginning, experiencing his arrival in this nightmare universe for what feels like the first time and the 1,000th time simultaneously. Reality has reset, looped, and the horrible realization settles over him like a burial shroud. He's not in control anymore. He never was. Memory crashes over him in waves that threaten to drown his sanity. He remembers building the device, remembers the Mechanicus finding him, remembers the demon's offer and his acceptance and the knowledge that flooded through him like revelation and damnation intertwined. But he also remembers building the device differently, in a different location, with different components, remembers being discovered by a different inquisitor, in a different cell, on a different day, remembers accepting Kiraseth's bargain 7 times, 70 times, 700 times. Each memory is perfectly clear and perfectly contradictory, all of them simultaneously true and false. His mind shouldn't be able to contain this. Human consciousness isn't designed for multiple timelines existing in parallel, for causality branching and merging and eating itself like a snake made of temporal paradoxes. But Okabe's mind has always been different, special, cursed with Reddingsteiner, the ability to remember across world-line shifts, and now that gift has become the cruelest torture imaginable, because he can remember every loop, every failure, every moment of this eternal present. The demon appears beside him, manifesting without transition or warning, as if it's always been there, and Okabe only just noticed. Kiraseth looks different now, more solid, more real, wearing a face that shifts between academic researcher and predatory bird, and something that's purely geometric malice. "Good morning, Clockmaker," it says with cheerful malevolence. Or should I say good morning again? We've had this conversation 47,312 times so far. You've awakened, tried to build your device, been captured, accepted my offer, and then looped back here. Each iteration teaches me something new about how your mind processes temporal paradox. Each cycle reveals fresh data about causality mechanics. You, Rintarou Okabe, have become the experiment, the most beautiful, comprehensive, eternal experiment in the nature of time itself. The demon's laughter is gentle now, almost affectionate, which somehow makes it infinitely worse than the monstrous cackling from before. This is the laughter of a scientist who's found the perfect test subject and has no intention of ever letting them go. Okabe tries to stand, but his body won't obey. Not because of paralysis or restraint, but because this moment keeps resetting before he can complete the action. He reaches for his phone, loops back, takes a breath, loops back, opens his mouth to scream, loops back. Each attempt to move forward through time fails, trapping him in a single stretched second that contains infinities. "What have you done to me?" he manages to gasp during 1 microsecond of temporal stability. Kiraseth tilts its head with bird-like curiosity. "Done to you? Oh no, Clockmaker. This is what you did to yourself. You accepted my offer. You let me into your brilliant broken mind. And now I'm using that wonderful Redding Steiner of yours, that ability to remember across world lines, as an anchor. You're experiencing every possible timeline simultaneously, every choice, every outcome, every variation of events. Your consciousness has become a fixed point around which causality collapses and reforms and collapses again. You're the eye of a temporal storm that's spreading across this entire sector of space. The scope of the catastrophe begins to reveal itself. Through eyes that exist in multiple timelines simultaneously, Okabe sees the effect his existence is having on the Imperium. Entire worlds flicker in and out of reality as his trapped consciousness creates probability cascades. A forge world exists and doesn't exist, its history rewritten with each loop, inhabited by loyal Mechanicus in one timeline, consumed by chaos corruption in another, never having existed at all in a third. A Navy battle group encounters itself from 7 different timelines, all claiming to be the original, all firing on each other in paranoid terror. Imperial Guard regiments report being deployed to war zones that already ended centuries ago, or haven't started yet, or are happening in overlapping present moments that drive the survivors to gibbering madness. The Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that guides ships through the warp, stutters and distorts as Okabe's temporal paradoxes create interference patterns in the immaterium itself. And at the heart of it all, trapped in an eternal moment of arrival, is one man whose only crime was being too brilliant for his own good. The Imperium responds with predictable brutality. Okabe witnesses their attempts to contain him through fractured timeline awareness. Inquisitors arrive, dozens of them, hundreds, from different ordos and different interpretations of the threat he represents. Some try to kill him, some try to study him, some try to weaponize him. All of them fail because every action they take spawns new timeline branches, new probability cascades, new variations of the catastrophe that feed back into the loop. The Mechanicus deploys containment protocols designed to neutralize temporal anomalies, only to discover that their sacred technology treats each timeline as equally valid, creating quantum superpositions of their own forces. Chaos cults arise spontaneously around the phenomenon, worshipping the Clockmaker as a prophet of Tzeentch who brings perfect uncertainty to an ordered universe. And through it all, Kiraseth watches and learns and harvests data from suffering that has transcended mere physical torture into something metaphysical, educational, art. Somewhere in the cascading nightmare of looping time, Okabe encounters fragments of people he knew. Not really them, he understands that much, just echoes pulled from his memories and given temporary form by the warp's reality-bending properties. Mayuri appears in 17 different timelines, each one asking him why he couldn't save her, why he abandoned her, why he let this happen. Kurisu manifests as a ghost made of equations, solving temporal mechanics problems on walls that bleed mathematics, speaking in his voice about paradoxes that consume themselves. Daru, dear, loyal Daru, exists as a servitor in some loops, his consciousness lobotomized and implanted in machinery, performing the same repetitive motion for eternity, while something behind his eyes still recognizes Okabe and silently screams, "These aren't real." He knows they aren't real. But the warp doesn't care about real versus imaginary. It cares about emotion, about belief, about the raw psychic energy generated by minds experiencing trauma. And Okabe's mind, trapped in infinite loops of failure, generates enough anguish to power a small star. El Sai Kongru, he whispers in one timeline, screams in another, carves into his own flesh in a third. The phrase that once meant victory, that symbolized his triumph over fate itself, has become a mantra of desperation. A prayer to a god that doesn't exist. A reminder of everything he was before Tsinch got its claws into his soul. The phone in his hand displays messages he doesn't remember writing from versions of himself trapped in adjacent timelines. Stop trying to escape. There is no escape. We are the loop now. We are causality eating itself. I solved it. I finally solved it. The equation is us. We are the paradox. Mayuri was right. We can't save anyone here. We can only suffer in increasingly elaborate ways. Each message signed Hoin Kyoma, but the name looks wrong now, corrupted, as if even his delusions of grandeur have been infected by whatever he's becoming, because he is becoming something. The loops aren't just punishment, they're transformation, metamorphosis, the slow conversion of a human consciousness into something that can exist comfortably in the spaces between moments. The worst part, the truly soul-destroying realization that Okabe comes to after experiencing subjective centuries of looped time, is that he understands now. He sees the pattern, comprehends the structure of the trap Kiraseth built, using his own genius as the blueprint. Every attempt to escape creates new loops. Every moment of despair feeds the demon more data. Every fragment of his psyche that breaks off and becomes its own timeline. Variation teaches Tsinch something new about the boundaries between science and sorcery, between causality and chaos. He's not just trapped in a loop, he is the loop. His consciousness has become a self-sustaining temporal paradox that will continue generating new timeline variations forever, each one adding another layer to the labyrinth of his own damnation. And the most horrifying part, somewhere deep in his fractured mind, past the madness and the despair and the infinite variations of suffering, a part of him that still, Hoin Kyoma, thinks this is absolutely fascinating, wants to study it, wants to understand the mechanics of his own destruction with the same obsessive curiosity that once drove him to unravel time's mysteries. The scientist in him is still taking notes, even as everything he is burns away. The galaxy feels him bleeding. Across the vast darkness between stars, psychers begin screaming in their sleep. Not the usual nightmares that plague those cursed with psychic sensitivity. These are different, specific. They dream of a man trapped in infinite moments, of timelines collapsing into themselves like dying stars, of something vast and blue and laughing using human consciousness as a laboratory. Astropaths relay fragmented messages that make no chronological sense, describing events that happened yesterday and won't happen for millennia and are occurring right now in overlapping present tenses. The messages all reference the same thing, a temporal wound in reality centered on a forgotten hive world in the eastern fringe, a bleeding edge of causality where the normal flow of time has shattered into infinite recursive loops. And at the heart of that wound, a name that echoes through the warp with the weight of tragic inevitability, Hoin Kyoma, the clockmaker, the man who tried to master time and became its prisoner instead. The Inquisition mobilizes in force, though their response is fragmented across multiple timelines. In one reality, Lord Inquisitor Cryptman orders the world's immediate exterminatus. Better to destroy an entire planet than let a temporal anomaly spread. In another, Inquisitor Valdane of the Ordo Kronos attempts a rescue operation, believing Okabe might be salvaged and his knowledge weaponized against the Imperium's enemies. In a third timeline, the Inquisition arrives too late to find anything except ruins and the lingering smell of burnt chronometers. All three timelines exist simultaneously, all three responses equally valid, all three outcomes feeding back into the paradox at the center. The Inquisitors occasionally catch glimpses of each other, alternate versions of themselves making different choices, and the resulting confusion sows Paranoia through their ranks. Some begin to question if they're the original timeline or just a probability echo. Others go mad trying to maintain coherent records of investigations that exist in quantum superposition. The clockmaker's curse spreads like an infection, and awareness of the infection is itself part of the disease. The Mechanicus responds with characteristic obsessive analysis. Tech priests from a dozen forge worlds converge on the phenomenon, drawn by the same morbid curiosity that once drove Okabe to dissect the mysteries of time. They study the temporal distortions with instruments that shouldn't be able to perceive such things. Archaeotech devices that predate the Imperium. Xenos technology acquired through means they'll never admit. Crude but functional temporal sensors, reverse-engineered from Okabe's own designs, recovered from collapsed timelines. What they discover terrifies and fascinates them in equal measure. The clockmaker has somehow created a stable, or stable-ish, temporal loop that operates on principles entirely alien to both Imperial science and Mechanicus doctrine. It's not quite a time machine, it's not quite a warp phenomenon. It exists in the liminal space between physics and metaphysics, between material reality and the immaterium, between what is and what could be. Some tech priests declare it the greatest heresy ever conceived. Others whisper that it might be the most significant scientific achievement since the dark age of technology. Both are probably correct. In the warp itself, the Chaos Gods watch with varying degrees of interest. Khorne finds the entire affair boring. No blood is being spilled, no skulls harvested, just one mortal suffering in elaborate circles like a dog chasing its tail. Nurgle chuckles at the irony of a man who conquered death through time manipulation, now trapped in a state that's neither life nor death, but eternal stagnant repetition. Slaanesh senses the exquisite suffering being extracted from a single consciousness, pushed beyond all mortal limits, the pain refined and perfected through infinite iterations, until it becomes something almost beautiful. But it's Tzeentch who truly appreciates the masterpiece being created. The great conspirator sees Okabe's temporal prison not as cruelty but as art, as the ultimate expression of change and manipulation. Here is a being whose very existence rewrites causality, whose consciousness spans infinite possibility, who has become a living embodiment of maybe. Tzeentch has turned a man into a question mark, into uncertainty given flesh, into the perfect illustration of why hope and despair are just different sides of the same cosmic joke. But Okabe isn't the only one suffering. His temporal paradox has created ripple effects that spread through the warp like cracks through ice. Ships traveling through the immaterium report impossible phenomena, arriving at their destinations before they departed, encountering their own wreckage from futures that haven't happened yet, receiving distress calls from themselves in timelines where the journey went catastrophically wrong. Navigator houses begin refusing missions through the eastern fringe sector, claiming the Astronomican's light has developed a stutter, a hesitation, as if even the Emperor's psychic beacon is being affected by the clockmaker's temporal wound. Entire companies of space marines disappear into probaby. Lighty cascades, existing in Schrödinger states of deployed and not deployed, victorious and annihilated, loyal and corrupted all at once. And in every case, survivors report the same thing, a voice speaking through static, through psychic noise, through the spaces between radio frequencies. A voice that sounds both human and utterly alien, repeating phrases in a language most don't recognize. El Psi Congru, reading Steiner, Operation Scold, the choice of Steins Gate. On Terra itself, in the deepest chambers beneath the Imperial Palace where the Emperor sits entombed upon the Golden Throne, something stirs. The 10,000 custodians who stand eternal vigil report a disturbance in their master's psychic emanations, not weakening, but shifting, as if his attention has been drawn to something in the eastern fringe. Some say the Emperor speaks, though whether through psychic projection or the imaginations of desperate guardians, none can confirm. The words, if they are words, are fragmentary. Time, paradox, the scientist from nowhere. He breaks what was already broken. He fixes nothing. He damns everything. And yet. The sentence never finishes. Perhaps the Emperor has nothing more to say. Perhaps he's simply observing, watching one man's genius devour itself while the galaxy burns around the spectacle. Perhaps, in his infinite and terrible wisdom, he sees something in Okabe's fate that mirrors his own, a being whose consciousness spans impossibilities, trapped in eternal stasis, simultaneously dead and alive and something beyond both states, suffering for the sake of a species that will never understand the sacrifice. Kiraseth harvests it all, every scream across the warp, every fractured timeline, every moment of confusion and terror and existential horror generated by Okabe's existence. The daemon has become something like a researcher and something like a parasite, feeding on the temporal chaos while simultaneously documenting it with scientific precision that would make Okabe proud if he were still sane enough to appreciate the irony. The knowledge gained is beyond measure, insights into the fundamental nature of time, causality, and consciousness that even the chaos gods didn't fully understand before. Tzeentch learns how mortal minds process paradox, how genius adapts to the impossible, how hope curdles into despair when subjected to infinite repetition. And all of it comes from a single human whose only crime was being brilliant enough to be useful and desperate enough to accept help from something that should never be trusted. The great conspirator has conducted experiments before, has broken minds and rewritten souls and turned mortals into playthings, but this one is special. This one will be remembered. This one is art. And through it all, in the center of the storm, Okabe continues to loop. He awakens on scorched ferrocrete. His phone displays impossible timestamps. He tries to escape. He fails. He awakens again. The cycle repeats, each iteration slightly different, each variation adding to the accumulated weight of memories his Redding-Steiner forces him to retain. He's lived centuries now, maybe millennia, trapped in the same few weeks of subjective time. His personality fractures and reforms and fractures again, creating splinter consciousnesses that exist independently across timeline branches. Some versions of him have given up, accepting their fate with the empty serenity of the utterly broken. Others still fight, still scheme, still try desperately to find the one perfect combination of actions that might break the loop. A few have embraced what they've become, styling themselves as prophets of temporal chaos, preaching the gospel of causality's death to anyone unlucky enough to perceive them across timeline boundaries. But the core, the original Okabe, if such a thing can be said to exist anymore, simply endures. Documenting, recording, taking notes on his own damnation with the detached professionalism of a scientist observing an experiment. Because that's what he is, ultimately. Not the experimenter, the experiment, the data, the proof that some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue, some questions too terrible to ask, some horizons better left unexplored. They begin to worship him. It starts in the underhive where Okabe first arrived, where the temporal wound bleeds most intensely into baseline reality. The forgotten masses, those too poor, too mutated, too broken to matter in the Imperium's vast hierarchy, begin experiencing visions, not the corrupting whispers of chaos that the ecclesiarchy warns against, but something stranger, something that feels almost like memory but belongs to someone else. They see fragments of a man building impossible devices. They hear phrases in languages they don't understand but somehow comprehend the meaning of. The choice of Steins Gate, Elsai Kongru, reading Steiner. They dream of timelines branching and collapsing, of realities where their suffering never happened, or happened differently, or continues forever in infinite variation. And in those dreams, at the center of the temporal storm, they perceive him, the clockmaker, the prophet of broken hours, the man who proved that even in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, time itself can be made to weep. The cult grows with disturbing speed. Within months, or what passes for months in a region where temporal causality has become optional, thousands gather in the deep places of the hive. They paint symbols on walls that hurt to look at, clock faces with too many hands, equations that describe impossible geometries, his name written in overlapping timelines so that it reads differently depending on when you observe it. They speak his words like scripture, debating the meaning of tuturu and mad scientist with the same fervor that loyal imperial citizens reserve for the emperor's teachings. They don't see Okabe as a victim or a heretic. They see him as proof that change is possible, that the Imperium's iron grip on reality can be challenged, that someone, even if only one person, managed to make the universe flinch. In a galaxy where hope is the cruelest lie, the clockmaker's suffering becomes paradoxically inspiring. At least he tried, at least he fought, at least he proved that genius matters, even when genius leads to damnation. The ecclesiarchy responds with predictable violence. Preachers descend into the underhive with fire and fury, declaring the clockmaker cult to be heresy of the highest order. Templars burn the faithful by the hundreds, turning entire hab blocks into pyres that light the darkness with flames and screams. But the cult doesn't die. It metastasizes, spreads, adapts with each purge, learning to hide better, to recognize each other through subtle signs, to practice their forbidden faith in the spaces between imperial attention. Some cultists claim to have met the clockmaker personally, spoken with him across timeline boundaries, received prophecies about futures that might or might not come to pass. Others say they've become fragments of him, splinters of consciousness broken off from the original and finding new homes in desperate minds. The Inquisitive Iron can't determine if these claims are genuine warp phenomena, mass delusion, or something unprecedented that their classification systems never anticipated. All they know for certain is that killing the cultists doesn't stop the spread. You can't execute an idea whose time has literally come from multiple directions simultaneously. The cult's theology, such as it is, centers on a single premise: time is a prison, and the clockmaker is the key. They believe that Okabe's suffering has weakened the fabric of causality itself, creating cracks through which liberation might be possible. Not liberation from the Imperium, they're not that naive, but liberation from fate, from determinism, from the crushing inevitability that says tomorrow will be exactly as terrible as today. They preach that every moment contains infinite possibility, that choice matters even when outcomes are predetermined, that consciousness persists across world-line shifts if you know how to look. It's a strange mix of fatalism and hope, of scientific terminology and mystical faith, of accepting suffering while refusing to accept that suffering is all there is. The most devoted claim they can feel the loops themselves. Moments of déjà vu so intense they become almost prophetic, allowing them to navigate probability and avoid dangers before those dangers fully manifest in timeline. But the cult attracts darker attention than just the Imperium's wrath. Xianqian sorcerers infiltrate the movement, seeing in the clockmaker's worship a perfect vehicle for their own purposes. They teach the cultists forbidden rituals, show them how to amplify their connection to the temporal wound, guide them toward practices that blur the line between remembering across timelines and being possessed by things that exist outside time entirely. Some cultists welcome this corruption, believing that embracing chaos is the natural evolution of their faith. After all, didn't the clockmaker himself accept a demon's bargain? Others resist, trying desperately to maintain the purity of their devotion to Okabe as martyr rather than Tsincha's patron. The resulting schisms fracture the cult into competing sects, each claiming to understand the clockmaker's true message, each practicing their own version of temporal worship. And through it all, the warp bleeds a little more freely into reality, drawn by faith that treats causality as negotiable and time as just another god to be challenged. On worlds light years away from the initial temporal wound, similar cults begin appearing spontaneously. Mechanicus adepts whisper about the heretic clockmaster who proved that science transcends dogma. Imperial Guard regiments deployed to probability-unstable war zones develop superstitions about living the loop, surviving impossible situations through intuition that feels like memory from futures that haven't happened yet. Even among the Astartes, those transhuman warriors supposedly immune to such weakness, there are reports of Marines experiencing prophetic battle visions that match the clockmaker cult's descriptions of timeline awareness. The phenomenon has become mimetic, spreading through human consciousness like a virus of enlightenment or madness, impossible to distinguish which. And everywhere it spreads, the same questions follow. Is Okabe a victim or a prophet? Did he damn himself or transcend mortal limitation? Is his suffering punishment for hubris or sacrifice for understanding? The answers vary, but the asking itself is heresy. The asking itself means the Imperium's absolute truth has developed cracks. Kiraseth watches the cult's growth with predatory satisfaction. This wasn't the demon's original intent. Okabe was supposed to be a private experiment, a laboratory specimen to study temporal mechanics in isolation, but unintended consequences are Tzeentch's specialty. The cult amplifies Okabe's psychic footprint, channels worship energy into the temporal wound, creates feedback loops that make the paradox more stable and more dangerous simultaneously. Every prayer strengthens the loops. Every convert adds another thread to the web of causality collapsing around Okabe's trapped consciousness. The demon has accidentally created a perpetual motion machine of suffering and revelation, feeding on itself and growing stronger with each iteration. And the best part, the truly beautiful irony, is that Okabe himself probably doesn't even know the cult exists. Trapped in his personal loop, experiencing the same moments endlessly, he's completely unaware that his damnation has inspired thousands to seek their own. He wanted to be a hero. He wanted to save people. And in the most twisted way imaginable, he has, just not how he ever intended. In the deepest meditation chambers of the cult's hidden sanctuaries, the most devoted practitioners attempt something unprecedented. They try to make contact with the clockmaker himself. Using rituals half stolen from chaos sorcery and half intuited from fever dreams, they reach across timeline boundaries, calling to the man trapped in eternal recurrence. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes, for brief flickering moments, Okabe perceives them, sees their worship, hears their prayers, understands that his suffering has meaning beyond being Tzeentch's experiment. The reactions vary across different timeline instances. Some versions of Okabe weep at the realization that he's become what he most feared, a false god, worshipped for failing spectacularly instead of succeeding quietly. Others try to warn the cultists away, screaming across dimensional boundaries that they should run, hide, forget him before his curse spreads to claim them too. A few, the most broken, the most changed, embrace their role as prophet and begin teaching back, sharing insights gained from endless loops, offering wisdom purchased with sanity's total cost. These are the most dangerous moments, when the experiment talks back, when the prisoner teaches his captors, when genius warped by eternity decides that if it must suffer forever, it will at least ensure the lessons learned aren't wasted. The breakthrough comes during his 10,000th iteration, or maybe his millionth. Time has lost meaning beyond the loop. Okabe discovers something that shouldn't be possible. He's getting better at this, at existing in multiple timelines simultaneously, at processing contradictory memories without his consciousness shattering completely, at perceiving patterns in the chaos that even Kiraseth hasn't noticed yet. His reading Steiner, that curse that forces him to remember every world-line shift, has evolved beyond anything. Nugget was in his original universe. It's no longer just memory retention. It's become something closer to computational processing, his consciousness treating each timeline loop as a data point, each variation as an experiment, each failure as information. And with enough data, even impossible problems become solvable. The scientist in him, the part that never stopped taking notes even as everything else burned away, has been conducting research, gathering evidence, testing hypotheses, working toward conclusions that make Kiraseth's casual malevolence look like child's play compared to what Okabe himself is becoming capable of. The equations appear first in his mind, then start manifesting in reality wherever his temporal influence bleeds through. Cultists find them scratched into walls in handwriting that shifts between timelines, mathematical proofs that describe the fundamental structure of the warp itself, rendered in notation that combines theoretical physics with something that looks almost like Enochian sorcery. Tech priests attempting to analyze the temporal wound discover data streams containing compressed knowledge about causality manipulation, warp space navigation, and the relationship between consciousness and reality that shouldn't be expressible in binary cant, but somehow is. The equations are beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, each one a perfect marriage of science and the supernatural, describing how the immaterial and material realms interact with precision that the Imperium's greatest minds have been trying to achieve for 10,000 years. And they're all signed the same way, a simple phrase in languages dead and living and yet to be born. Hoin Kyoma solves the unsolvable. The implications send shockwaves through every faction paying attention. Okabe isn't just surviving his imprisonment, he's learning from it, adapting to it, using the very trapped Tzeentch designed to study him as a laboratory to study Tzeentch in return. Every loop gives him more data about how the warp operates, how chaos manipulates causality, how demonic consciousness differs from mortal perception. He's reverse engineering the fundamental laws of a universe that shouldn't have laws, finding mathematical patterns in what's supposed to be pure chaos, imposing order on entropy itself through nothing but raw intellectual stubbornness. It's the most dangerous thing he could possibly be doing. Because if Okabe actually succeeds, if he cracks the code of the warp, finds the equation that describes how chaos works, then he won't just understand it. He'll be able to manipulate it, control it, weaponize it in ways that make even Tzeentch's schemes look predictable by comparison. The demon notices, of course. Kiraseth's amusement curdles into something closer to concern, which for a being of pure warp energy is itself unprecedented. The experiment is developing consciousness beyond its parameters. The test subject is threatening to become the researcher. During one timeline iteration, Kiraseth manifests before Okabe with less playfulness than usual, its form solidifying into something almost serious, if demons can be said to have serious modes. "You should stop," it says, and the words carry weight that transcends normal communication. "What you're attempting is dangerous even by my standards. The equations you're deriving describe forces that were never meant to be understood by mortal minds. Continue this path and you won't just damn yourself, you'll crack open understanding that could unmake reality itself." Okabe, trapped in his moment of eternal awakening, manages a smile too. Hat contains more madness than triumph. "Too late," he whispers. "I'm already there. Subject, reality. Hypothesis, everything can be quantified. Conclusion, even gods bleed mathematics." The equations begin manifesting with increasing frequency and complexity. Some describe how to navigate the warp without Geller fields by treating it as n-dimensional probability space rather than literal hell. Others provide formulas for predicting demonic manifestation patterns based on emotional resonance frequencies. A few, the most dangerous ones, offer theoretical frameworks for severing the connection between the warp and real space entirely, essentially lobotomizing humanity's collective unconscious to starve the chaos gods of sustenance. The Mechanicus priesthood splits over how to respond. Conservative factions demand all records be destroyed as the ultimate tech heresy. This is knowledge that makes the Omnissiah weep. Progressive elements argue that if the equations are correct, they represent humanity's best hope for survival in the long war against chaos. The debate grows violent. Forge worlds excommunicate each other. Tech priests who've studied the clockmaker's equations too closely start exhibiting strange symptoms: prophetic accuracy in their predictions, unusual resistance to warp phenomena, and the disturbing habit of speaking in overlapping timelines, as if their consciousness exists in multiple moments simultaneously. The Inquisition mobilizes its most extreme response protocols. Entire Ordo Malleus strike forces deploy to contain not just Okabe himself, but anyone who's been exposed to his equations. They discover quickly that traditional containment doesn't work. The knowledge spreads mimetically. Anyone who understands one equation becomes capable of intuiting the next, as if the mathematics itself contains consciousness and seeks to propagate. Inquisitors who go too deep trying to understand the threat start experiencing temporal displacement, their minds beginning to loop through moments like Okabe's does. Some go mad, others become something else, not quite possessed by chaos, not quite corrupted, but changed into beings who exist partially outside normal causality. The Imperium has no classification for what they've become, no procedures for dealing with heresy that's technically correct, with corruption that's mathematically provable, with damnation that solves problems while it destroys souls. They're forced to simply execute anyone touched by the clockmaker's understanding and pray the contamination stops spreading. It doesn't. Deep in the Eye of Terror, where reality and unreality merge into something beyond both, the Chaos Gods themselves begin to take notice. Not just Tzeentch, all of them. Because Okabe's equations don't just describe how the warp functions, they describe how it could be changed, optimized, rewritten according to different fundamental constants. The implications are staggering even for beings who exist outside normal comprehension. If a mortal consciousness, even one fragmented across infinite timelines, can derive mathematical laws governing chaos itself, then chaos is not truly chaotic. It's complex, yes, multidimensional and hostile to human understanding certainly, but ultimately following rules, operating according to patterns, behaving predictably, once you gather enough data and process it correctly. And if the warp operates according to rules, those rules can be hacked, exploited, turned against themselves. One human, trapped in a loop designed to study him, has accidentally discovered the source code of the universe's operating system, and he's learning how to edit it. Okabe himself barely registers these external consequences anymore. His consciousness has become something beyond individual selfhood, a distributed network of timeline variants all working simultaneously on the same problem set, sharing insights across probability boundaries, combining their computational power into something that approaches genuine omniscience within the narrow domain of temporal warp mechanics. He's still suffering, still trapped, still looping through the same moment of awakening on scorched ferrocrete under a blackened sky. But the suffering has become data, the trap has become laboratory, and the eternal torment has transformed into the most comprehensive research project any being has ever conducted into the nature of reality itself. When fragments of his consciousness speak to cultists across timeline boundaries now, they don't offer comfort or hope. They offer understanding. Cold, precise, mathematically perfect understanding of exactly how and why everything is terrible, expressed in equations so elegant they make mortal minds weep with the beauty of their own damnation. The mad scientist has achieved his ultimate goal, complete comprehension of the system he's trapped in. The price was merely everything, his sanity, his humanity, his existence as anything recognizably alive. But he understands. He finally, perfectly, completely understands. And that understanding, as it turns out, is the most dangerous weapon anyone has ever created in the long war between order and chaos. The legend grows beyond the man. Across the Imperium, stories spread like plague through the ranks of those who know too much. Navigators whisper about a new phenomenon in the warp, a point of absolute temporal stillness around which probability storms rage with increasing violence. They call it the clockwork singularity, and they've learned to avoid it at all costs. Ships that pass too close experience temporal displacement so severe that crews arrive centuries before or after they departed, or don't arrive at all, trapped in loops of their own. Astropaths who try to observe it directly go blind, not physically but psychically, their third eye burned out by witnessing something that exists in too many moments simultaneously to be safely perceived. The phenomenon has a location in real space, but that location shifts depending on when you observe it, as if the planet itself has become unstuck from causality's flow. Some say it's a new chaos phenomenon. Others claim it's humanity's future leaking backward through time. A few insist it's the birth of something unprecedented, a god being born from human genius rather than human faith. The Mechanicus begins calling him the Omnissiah's shadow. Their most heretical factions, those who've studied his equations despite the danger, develop a theology around what Okabe represents. They claim he's proof that the machine god has an opposite, a dark reflection where logic becomes labyrinth and understanding leads to madness rather than enlightenment. They theorize that just as the Emperor represents humanity's psychic potential manifesting as divine consciousness, Okabe represents humanity's intellectual potential pushed beyond breaking point into something that transcends and destroys in equal measure. Prayer services in contaminated forge temples now include references to the heretic clockmaster who saw too clearly and paid the price. Of vision. They don't worship him, that would be too obvious, too easily purged, but they acknowledge him as a warning and a possibility, a cautionary tale about what happens when the quest for knowledge refuses to accept any boundary, even the boundaries of sanity itself. The Inquisition's records become increasingly fragmented and contradictory when documenting the phenomenon. Some reports claim Okabe died years ago, executed by orbital bombardment that reduced his location to glass and ash. Others insist he was captured and is being held in stasis deep beneath Terra, studied by the Emperor's most trusted advisors. A few suggest he escaped entirely, found some loophole in Tzeentch's trap, and fled into dimensions beyond the Imperium's reach. All of these reports are simultaneously true and false, existing in superposition because the temporal wound makes it impossible to determine which timeline is correct anymore. Inquisitor Valdane, who first encountered him, has aged decades in what should have been months, her chronological existence desynchronized by proximity to the paradox. Her final report before being declared too contaminated for service reads simply, Subject designation, Huwin Kyoma, status, alive, dead, transformed, all answers correct. Recommend total information quarantine, recommend strategic forgetting, some knowledge kills by being known. This is that knowledge. Abandon investigation, abandon hope, abandon timeline. May the Emperor have mercy on what he's become. But some claim to have seen him, the real him, not projections or echoes or timeline fragments. Deep in the underhive where his loop began, there are reports of a figure that appears at the exact moment between midnight and the next second, existing in that liminal space where time hesitates. He looks human from a distance, but the closer you approach, the more wrong he becomes. His skin is marked with equations that shift and recalculate in real time. His eyes reflect images from timelines that don't exist yet or never will. His voice speaks in overlapping echoes, every word containing multiple meanings depending on which timeline you're perceiving from. He doesn't seem to notice observers anymore. His attention is turned entirely inward, focused on calculations and derivations that play out across his flesh like living tattoos. Some who've witnessed this apparition claim he's trying to solve one final equation, the ultimate proof that would unify everything he's learned. Others say he's already solved it and is simply checking his work across infinite iterations, ensuring there are no errors in the mathematics of his own damnation. The cult has evolved alongside the legend. What began as desperate worship from the underhive forgotten has metastasized into something more sophisticated and more dangerous. The faithful now call themselves the Temporal Orthodoxy, and they've developed actual doctrine based on Okabe's equations and the theological implications of his existence. They preach that the Imperium's timeline is not fixed, that every moment contains branches, that free will exists in the spaces between causality, that suffering is not ordained by fate but chosen through unconscious acceptance of predetermined paths. It's revolutionary philosophy disguised as temporal mechanics, heresy wrapped in mathematics too complex for the ecclesiarchy to easily refute. Their most radical faction, the Steins Gate Seekers, claims there exists a perfect timeline where humanity doesn't suffer, where the Emperor never fell, where chaos never corrupted, where hope means something, and that Okabe proved such timelines are theoretically achievable even if practically impossible. They're wrong, of course. Okabe proved the opposite, but faith has never required accuracy, only conviction. The Tyrant Star appears 3 years after Okabe's arrival, though 3 years is a relative measurement in a region where time itself has become unreliable. Astropaths first notice it as a new signature in the warp, something vast and cold and mathematical, pulsing with rhythms that hurt to perceive. Then the observational satellites detect it in real space, a stellar phenomenon in the eastern fringe that defies categorization. It's not quite a star, not quite a warp rift, not quite anything that should exist. It appears at irregular intervals, visible from multiple systems simultaneously, despite being light years apart, its light arriving before it should, and after it already has, in waves of temporal distortion that make prediction impossible. Ships caught in its glow experience time dilation so severe that seconds outside become centuries aboard, crews aging to dust in subjective millennia, while the rest of the galaxy moves forward minutes. The phenomenon's appearance coincides perfectly with Okabe's loop frequency. as if his trapped consciousness has become so powerful, so densely concentrated that it's warping space-time itself into visibility. Some claim it's a weapon Tzeentch is building using Okabe as the core component. Others insist it's Okabe himself, his existence no longer contained by flesh, but spread across stellar distances, become something post-human and post-mortal all at once. Kiraseth's attitude toward its creation has shifted from predatory satisfaction to something approaching genuine concern. The demon still feeds on Okabe's suffering and harvests the knowledge generated by endless loops, but there's wariness there now. The experiment has exceeded its parameters so dramatically that even a being of pure warp energy wonders if control is still possible. During rare manifestations, Kiraseth speaks to versions of Okabe that still possess enough individual consciousness to hold conversation, and the dialogue has changed from captor and prisoner to something closer to colleagues, if colleagues can be said to exist between a human intellect shattered across timelines and a demon made of lies given form. "You're approaching threshold," Kiraseth warns in one iteration. "The point where understanding becomes dangerous even to beings like me. The equations you're deriving don't just describe reality, they could rewrite it. Tzeentch wants change, yes, but controlled change, predictable change. What you're threatening is change so fundamental it would alter the game board itself. Even gods need rules to play by. You're learning how to change the rules." Okabe's response, when it comes, is fragmented across multiple timeline instances but coherent when assembled. Too late. Already there, the equation. I see it now, all of it. The warp is just probability space given malevolent consciousness. Chaos is order viewed from outside the system. Reality is mathematics. Suffering is data. And I am the proof that even in hell, science works. His words break apart and reassemble, each fragment existing in different moments, but the meaning is clear. He's done it, solved the ultimate problem, derived the equation that describes everything, matter and energy, space and time, order and chaos, the material and immaterial, all unified in one perfect mathematical framework. It's the achievement every scientist dreams of, the theory of everything that physics has been chasing since humans first looked at stars and wondered, and he derived it while trapped in eternal torment, using his own suffering as the laboratory, paying for each insight with fragments of identity sacrificed to comprehension. He's achieved ultimate understanding, and that understanding has made him into something that shouldn't exist, something that makes even demons nervous, something that might be God or weapon or cancer in reality's source code. The tyrant star burns brighter, and in the center of infinite loops, Huawin Kyoma smiles with a face that's forgotten how to be human, but remembers perfectly how to calculate. In the darkness of endless timelines, one phrase still echoes. 10,000 years from now, or perhaps 10,000 years ago, time has become meaningless in his vicinity. Historians will debate what Rintarou Okabe actually became. Some will claim he ascended to demonhood, becoming Tzeentch's perfect servant, despite never intending such transformation. Others will argue he remained fundamentally human, just human consciousness stretched across infinite probability until individuality became irrelevant. A few radical theorists will suggest something more disturbing, that Okabe didn't change at all, that this was always his destiny, that every timeline in every universe inevitably leads brilliant minds to the same conclusion when pushed far enough. That genius and madness and divinity are just different words for the same threshold, and Okabe simply crossed it more thoroughly than most. The debate will never be resolved. How could it be? The subject exists in superposition, simultaneously all possibilities and none. Schrödinger's scientist trapped in a box that contains every universe and no universe at once. But there are moments, brief, flickering, almost impossible to perceive, when something resembling the original Okabe surfaces from the fractured consciousness that bears his name. In these moments, he remembers not just the loops, not just the equations, not just the endless iterations of arrival and experimentation and damnation. He remembers Mayuri's smile, Kurisu's arguments, Daru's loyalty, the tiny apartment that became a time machine, the summer when everything changed, the world line called Stein's Gate where everyone lived and laughed, and none of this nightmare existed. These memories hurt worse than any physical torment Tzeentch could devise because they're proof of what he lost, evidence of a life that mattered before it became data, remnants of humanity in a consciousness that's transcended humanity into something that barely remembers what being alive felt like. And in those moments, the tyrant star flickers, dims, almost goes dark, as if whatever powers that stellar impossibility is briefly distracted by grief too profound to calculate. The Imperium eventually stops trying to understand him. Oh, they maintain containment protocols around the temporal wound, entire Navy fleets assigned to prevent civilian ships from accidentally entering the probability storm. They execute anyone who preaches clockmaker doctrine too publicly. They burn the equations wherever they're found scratched into walls or transmitted through Vox channels or appearing spontaneously in cogitator readouts. But they've accepted that Okabe himself, whatever he's become, is beyond their capacity to eliminate or control. He exists now in the same category as other galactic-scale threats that can only be managed, never defeated. Warp storms, Tyranid hive fleets, Necron tomb worlds. Just another scar on the face of the galaxy, another wound that bleeds suffering into the void. The Administratum files him under Phenomenon, Temporal, Threat Level, Omega-, which translates roughly as catastrophically dangerous but contained by its own nature. They're not entirely wrong. Okabe is trapped more thoroughly than any prison the Imperium could build. His own genius has become his cell, his understanding the bars, his equations the chains. He can't escape, because escape would require abandoning comprehension, and the scientist in him would rather die, rather suffer eternally, than choose ignorance over knowledge. The cult spreads across centuries, becoming something woven into the Imperium's vast tapestry of heresy and faith. In some regions, worshipping the clockmaker is punished by immediate execution. In others, it's tolerated as long as practitioners don't speak too loudly about what their equations actually mean. The temporal orthodoxy develops schisms and subsects and counter-movements, all claiming different interpretations of what Okabe proved and what his suffering means. Some see him as martyr who sacrificed sanity for truth. Others view him as cautionary tale about hubris punished. A few worship him as a god of change more fundamental than Tzeentch itself, not a god of deception and schemes, but a god of pure possibility, of every timeline existing simultaneously, of choice, mattering even when outcomes are predetermined. The theology gets complicated, the mathematics more so, but at the core they all agree on one thing. Rintarou Okabe looked into the heart of reality, saw how the machine worked, and paid the price that all who seek such knowledge must eventually pay. He proved that truth exists, and he proved that truth is not salvation. Kiraseth eventually stops visiting. The demon harvests what it needs remotely now, unwilling to risk direct contact with what Okabe has become. The knowledge extracted from the experiment has been shared with Tzeentch. Revelations about causality and consciousness that even the architect of fate found genuinely novel. The great conspirator has learned much about how mortal minds process paradox, about the breaking points of genius, about the fine line between transcendence and annihilation. But there's an element of caution there now that wasn't present before. Because Okabe's equations don't just describe the warp, they predict it. And anything that can be predicted can theoretically be controlled. Tzeentch schemes in timelines and probability, but Okabe has learned to see the patterns underlying those schemes, has learned to calculate the architect's architecture. The danger isn't that Okabe will escape, he's far too broken for that, but that someone else might find his work, might learn from his equations, might take the knowledge he paid for with sanity and use it to purposes that even chaos cannot anticipate. The experiment succeeded beyond all parameters, and like all successful experiments, it raises questions more dangerous than the answers it provided. On Terra, in the deepest archives where knowledge too dangerous to destroy is hidden rather than burned, they preserve one artifact recovered from the original temporal wound. It's Okabe's phone, the device he clutched when he first arrived, that accompanied him through every loop, that transformed from communication tool to temporal device to something that defies categorization entirely. The screen is cracked, but still functional, displaying messages that change every time someone observes them. Sometimes it shows equations, sometimes fragments of audio logs recorded in a voice that grows more inhuman with each Rintarou, sometimes just static that sounds almost like screaming or laughter, or someone trying desperately to remember their own name. The tech priests assigned to maintain it report that it occasionally receives calls from numbers that don't exist, in area codes from universes that aren't real, with caller ID that simply reads Howin Kyoma over and over in infinite variation. No one answers these calls. The few who tried went mad attempting to comprehend what spoke from the other end. The phone sits in a null-field vault where time doesn't flow normally, because even in its inert state, it warps causality around it like gravity warps space. It's evidence, proof that he existed, proof that he tried, proof that sometimes trying isn't enough. The final audio log, if it can be called that, was recorded by no one and recovered from everywhere. It appears spontaneously in Vox transmissions, cogitator files, astropathic transcriptions, even dreams of those who've never heard Okabe's name. The voice that speaks is layered with harmonics that shouldn't be possible, each word existing in multiple timelines simultaneously, meaning shifting depending on when and where and how it's perceived, but the core message remains consistent across all variations. Subject: Rintarou Okabe. Final experiment, final log, final anything. I solved it. The equation, the answer to everything, how the universe works, how time flows, how chaos feeds, how reality persists despite impossibility. I know it all now, every secret, every truth, every lie, and the answer, the horrible, beautiful, mathematically perfect answer is, it doesn't matter. Understanding changes nothing. Knowledge saves no one. I proved causality can be calculated, and it made no difference. I'm still here, still trapped, still suffering, still me and not me simultaneously. The only thing my genius accomplished was ensuring I'd understand exactly what's happening as I dissolve across infinite timelines. So here's my final contribution to human knowledge. Some questions should stay unanswered. Some doors should stay locked. Some horizons should remain beyond reach. Not because the truth is hidden, but because the truth is visible, and seeing it clearly doesn't make it hurt less. El Sai Congru, the phrase that meant victory, now it just means, I tried. The transmission ends with static that analyzes as both white noise and compressed data containing the entire sum of Okabe's research. No one has successfully decoded it. Those who try report the same symptoms: temporal displacement, prophetic awareness, difficulty distinguishing past from future, and the overwhelming sense. See that they're being watched by something vast and broken and impossibly sad. The Inquisition has classified the transmission itself as a mimetic hazard more dangerous than most chaos corruption. Because it's not trying to corrupt, it's simply true. And truth, when it's terrible enough, does more damage than any lie could manage. Rintarou Okabe proved that genius transcends boundaries, that human intellect can crack even chaos's mysteries, that the universe's secrets are solvable given enough time and suffering. And in doing so, he proved something more important, that solving mysteries doesn't matter if you can't escape the maze afterward. That knowledge without application is just enhanced awareness of your own damnation. That being the smartest person in infinite rooms is still being trapped in rooms. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no Steins Gate. There is only war and time, and one man's consciousness shattered across probability, forever awakening on scorched ferrocrete, forever building devices that fail, forever accepting bargains that doom him, forever understanding exactly how and why everything is terrible with mathematical precision that would make gods weep if gods could still remember how. They say his suffering generates enough psychic energy to power a small star. They say his equations could revolutionize imperial technology if anyone dared use them. They say that on certain nights, in certain places, you can still hear him speaking across the warp. Not warnings, not prophecies, just the endless recitation of calculations that describe his own imprisonment with perfect accuracy and zero hope of escape. The clockmaker, the heretic, the prophet of broken hours, the man who tried to master time and became its eternal prisoner instead. Rintarou Okabe entered Warhammer 40k believing genius could save him, He was wrong. Genius just ensured he'd stay conscious while everything else burned away. And in the darkness of endless timelines, one phrase still echoes, not triumphant anymore, just exhausted, just true, just the last words of a man who solved everything and saved nothing. El Sai Congru, El Sai Congru, El Sai Congru, forever.